Right, still being welcomed by the markets. And now let's move to a different country entirely, but President Cyril Ramaphosa is there in Geneva, co-chairing the meeting of the International Labour Organization in Switzerland. Our reporter Aldrin Sampear is in Geneva following those. So he's on this committee, something of an expert in labour. Tell us what our president is up to, Aldrin.
Well, certainly indeed. And when I was speaking to the permanent representative of South Africa to the United Nations here in Geneva, she spoke about how Cyril Ramaphosa comes in as a quote-unquote probably a triple threat, because this is someone who has a background in business. This is someone who has a background in labor, but this is now also someone who is a head of a government, the South African government, to be quite specific. And they're having discussions around the globe's response to not only the fourth industrial revolution, but how the definition of work is changing due to issues such as climate change, and how should governments be responding to those issues. But quite importantly, I guess, for South Africa and its input in these discussions that are taking place is how does a country which has the highest rate of inequality benefit from these discussions that are taking place here, and whatever recommendations come out of these discussions, which will only be tabled in 2019 to coincide with the centenary of the ILO, which will actually be taking place here, where the President Cyril Ramaphosa is also expected to deliver an address during that conference that will be taking place in 2019. How does South Africa benefit from this? And earlier on, when I was speaking to one of the union representatives from Uni Global, Philip Jennings, and he was speaking about the high inequality rate in South Africa and how the South African government should be responding to that. And speaking to business, which is also presented here, speaking to one of the business representatives who was speaking about how, for instance, in France, if you look at the legislation there is legislation around inequality and how to deal with the gender gap when it comes to pay disparities. And that legislation leading with the penalties of not following the legislation leading all the way up to incarceration. And he says that this is probably some things that the various governments should be looking into, and quite specifically South Africa as well.
We're not only bad on inequality, but we're bottom of the class, basically, when it comes to labor relations as well. In the World Economic Forum, 137 out of 137 countries. But there's also something else on his agenda, Aldrin. According to some sources, government also wants to use all trips right now to garner support for our seat on the Security Council.
Well, certainly that's very important for South Africa. As you know, that even the Deputy President, Didi Mabuza, who was in Russia for that visit, when the meeting with the meeting with Vladimir Putin in Russia, which took place, and it's caused another meeting that will look into how does South Africa make sure that it woos the international community in terms of trying to get this non-permanent seat at the Security Council, and also probably at some point this reform around the push around the reform of the Security Council to have a permanent seat. You remember that South Africa has the support of the African Union, but does it have the support all around the globe to ensure that it has this? This will be very important for Cyril Ramaphosa as well. Of course, the voting on that will be taking place next month at the United Nations, and it will be very important for him because Thabo Mbeki has managed to secure a non-permanent seat, as well as the former president Jacob Zuma. Will Cyril Ramaphosa be able to also get the support that he may need to ensure that South Africa also gets a non-permanent seat on the Security Council? Just to take a few steps back, I just want to quickly speak about the unemployment rate. I nearly forgot about this. Earlier on, I speak to Mildred Olifant, the Minister of Labour, and she was responding to the unemployment rate, which was announced yesterday at about 26.7%. And I asked her about government's response to this and how does government deal with this stubborn high unemployment rate. We in Geneva in Switzerland, where you find the unemployment rate is standing at around 3%, but in South Africa it's standing at 26.7%. And just listen to what her response to this was.
In 2008, there was a crisis when it comes to the economy of the country, but also, as you're well aware, The rating agencies downgraded our country, but we are progressing now very well, and I believe that since we have now came out of that stage, probably we are going to be able to go further and create more jobs.